35,555. That's roughly how many uniformed officers the NYPD had on the books this year to cover 8.3 million residents. One radio call can turn a quiet block into a scene that changes a life inside a minute. But the job covering all of them runs on 8-hour tours and a meal break the patrol guide itself says isn't guaranteed to count as a break. So the real question isn't whether the NYPD can cover a city this size, it's what that costs the person wearing the badge. That cost starts with the belt. Picture your own tour starting at 7 in the morning. Roll call 5 minutes in, standing in a precinct muster room while a sergeant reads off assignments, open complaints and whatever happened on the last shift that you need to know, walking out the door. Then it's onto the street in a uniform built for durability more than comfort. A duty belt loaded with a firearm, spare magazines, handcuffs, a radio, a baton, pepper spray, sometimes a taser. That alone can run 15 to 30 pounds, depending on the assignment. Add soft body armor underneath the shirt, and you're carrying a small child's worth of gear before the first call even comes in, and nowhere, most of the time, to set any of it down. None of it comes off until the tour ends 8 hours later, whether the shift is quiet or it isn't. Here's the part that surprises people who've never worked a radio car. The NYPD doesn't run on one continuous stream of action. It runs on something the department calls uncommitted time, roughly 2 hours and 40 minutes of an 8-hour tour.
Rubber white gray sweatpants. Gray clobbering colored Tahoe.
Close to a third of the whole shift set aside for a sector officer to actually engage the neighborhood instead of chasing calls. Sounds almost gentle, but that block gets spent walking into a building with an open complaint, sitting with a shop owner who's had 3 break-ins this month, doing the slow relationship work that never shows up on a stat sheet. All while carrying a radio that can pull you off that conversation mid-sentence and send you 3 blocks north in under a minute. And the radio never really goes quiet in a city this size. Researchers who pulled a full year of NYPD call data counted 7 million records assigned to responding officers and found more than a quarter of them involved something with a social or mental health dimension. Not burglaries, not robberies in progress, arguments, welfare checks, people in crisis who need somebody to show up faster than any hospital can. You might go from a fender bender to a domestic dispute to a person standing on a ledge. 3 completely different emotional registers inside of one shift, with no time built in to reset between them. The engine idles. The scanner crackles. Then it doesn't, for 20 whole minutes, and that silence gets its own kind of tension. You'd think the meal break would be the one guaranteed pause in all of that. It isn't quite. The patrol guide is blunt about it in writing. Meal relief is not considered an emergency, which means if something breaks bad, that break waits.
Zal ik je die voeren? Nee.
And even when it happens, an officer isn't supposed to leave the post or sector until the meal actually starts and has to be back on post the moment it ends. Travel time isn't authorized. So the 30 or 45 minutes you get to eat is measured to the post, not the plate. There's no break room built into a foot patrol. There's no walking to a kitchen down the hall. Whatever's open on the block and whatever the radio allows is the meal you get. And plenty of tours it gets pushed, shortened or interrupted before the fork ever comes back down. By mid-shift, the physical toll starts showing up in small ways you feel before you name them. Standing on a foot post in a loaded duty belt for hours straight puts weight through the hips and lower back in a way most desk jobs never will. A dull ache that settles in around hour 4 and doesn't leave when the shift does. Riding in a radio car all tour does something different, but no gentler. Hours folded into a driver's seat with a vest compressing the chest, getting in and out at every stop with 30 pounds strapped to the waist. Officers assigned to vertical patrols in NYPD housing developments climb stairwells floor by floor, checking landings and rooftops, because the elevators in some of those buildings can't be trusted, and because that's exactly where trouble likes to wait. The stairwells smell like concrete and old paint and whatever's cooking 3 floors up. Nobody tracks how many flights that adds up to in a week. It just adds up in the knees. Here's the strange part almost nobody outside the department thinks about. An officer working a radio car spends the tour listening to a channel that isn't really theirs, alone. Every unit on that frequency hears every job that comes in, which means you can be 3 sectors away, half a sandwich into a meal you weren't supposed to interrupt, and still feel your whole body go rigid when a certain code comes over the air. The old signal for an officer needing help, the 1013, still lands the same way it always has, a jolt that skips the thinking part of the brain entirely. You don't have to be assigned to that call to feel it in your chest. That's the cost of sharing one channel across a city this size. Everyone's emergency becomes, for 3 or 4 seconds, yours too. The specialized end of the department carries its own version of the same math. The Emergency Service Unit, roughly 330 officers total, spread across squads covering every borough, plus a dedicated hazmat and rescue truck, is who gets sent when a regular radio car calls for something beyond what a sidearm and a radio can handle. Barricaded subjects, structural collapse, someone on a bridge railing at 3 in the morning. 330 people covering 8 million means that on any given tour, the officers most trained to handle the worst calls are stretched thin enough that just getting to the next one fast enough becomes its own kind of pressure, one that has nothing to do with skill and everything to do with distance on a map. There's a shortage running underneath all of it that never makes the recruiting footage. The department lost officers to retirement and resignation faster than it could replace them through most of last year. Hundreds a month by some counts, which is part of why the city signed off on a plan to push the uniformed headcount toward 40,000 by 2029. Until that hiring catches up, tours that are supposed to run 3 sector cars sometimes run with 2. And the uncommitted time meant to fund the slow community work gets eaten by the calls that actually come in instead. What's written in the plan and what happens on the block aren't always the same shift. And then there's the detail nobody puts in the academy brochure, the one every veteran patrol officer eventually gets asked about and half laughs off, half winces at. On a footpost or in a sector car, a working bathroom isn't a given, and treating it as a punchline misses the logistics underneath it. Officers on patrol learn a private map of precincts, fire stations, and a rotating list of businesses that will let them in the back, because using a public restroom in uniform carries its own risk. Your back to the door, your gun exposed, in a stall you didn't choose and can't secure. Veteran officers trade that map like folklore. The 24-hour diner 2 blocks off your usual beat. The precinct 3 sectors over that's easier to reach than your own. It's the quiet, unglamorous cost sitting underneath every other hour of the tour. The one nobody mentions when they talk about what the badge is supposed to be worth. So what does all of that actually do to a single officer, 8 hours in, gear still on, radio still live? It shows up as a kind of alertness that never fully drops. Not adrenaline, that burns out fast. Something quieter and more exhausting. The low hum of knowing the next transmission could be nothing or could be everything. And there's no way to tell which until it's already happening. A shift that's been routine for 6 straight hours can turn in the time it takes to key a mic. And you have to be exactly as sharp for that turn as you were at the start of the tour, wearing the same 30 pounds, on the same feet, having eaten whatever 30-minute window the job allowed, and not 1 minute more. That's the part worth sitting with. It isn't the danger that wears a department this size down the fastest. Danger is rare enough on most tours that officers can go weeks without anything close to it. It's the 8 hours of low-grade readiness, stacked day after day, tour after tour, across 35,000 people covering a city that never actually clocks out. The gear stays on, the radio stays live. And somewhere out there, right now, someone is standing on a footpost in the exact block you might walk past tomorrow, 30 pounds heavier than they'd like to be, listening for a code they hope never comes. So the next time you pass a radio car idling on the corner, or an officer standing at a subway entrance who looks like they're just watching the crowd go by, remember what that stillness is actually made of. A third of a tour spent trying to build trust, one conversation at a time. A meal that isn't guaranteed to stay a meal. A shortage the department is still hiring its way out of, one class at a time. Was the coverage this city runs on ever supposed to cost this much? Per person, per tour, per block?